I want to start by showing you a few images that have nothing to do with education. If you were to enter some keywords into Google, for example, if you were to enter like surgery in the early 20th century, you might see an image like this one here. And if you were to then say, what about the 1950s? You might see an image like this where it changes. And if you were to say like, the 2000s or beyond, you would see a pretty different image of what the delivery of medicine looks like over the course of 100 years or so. Similarly, if you were to say media or communications, you might see something like this in the 1900s, and you might see something like this in the 1950s, and you'd see something quite different in the 2000s. If you go to transportation, something like this in the 1900s, cars in the 1950s, planes and beyond now. Now I want to apply it to classrooms. If you were to do the same thing and you were to enter into Google Classrooms in the 1900s, you might see something like this. If you were to enter 1950s, you might see something like this. And if you were to enter today, you would see something like this. And one of the observations that animates the work that we do at Transcend is that those images are not particularly different. And when we think about how vastly society has changed in almost every other sector in terms of how things are delivered, you see a stark contrast with what you would see in education. So here comes the first part of our interactive discussion. I want to give you a challenge, and I like to do this with groups and just see, if you were to look at these three images, how many features of school can you find that are consistent across these time periods? And so a feature could be something like the fact that there are desks, and kids are sitting at desks, and those desks are pointing the front of the room. So you can use that one to get you started. But just take a moment to think about that, and then when you think of a feature that you notice is unchanged, just raise your hand, and I'll toss you the microphone. Yeah, great. Here you go.
Every student has notebooks, traditional notebooks, or schoolwork on their desk versus technology.
Great. Thanks for getting us started. What else? Over here.
One to many, so one teacher at the front with multiple students.
Yeah, so there's sort of a broadcast kind of a mode, like the teacher's got it, the teacher's broadcasting. Yes?
Class sizes are basically the same.
Class sizes, so somewhere between 20 and 30 or 40 kids in a room as part of a class. Can you catch this? Okay.
There's no space for group interaction. All the kids are just looking forward, and they aren't grouped at all.
Right, and so that's conditioning a certain way of working and engaging. You want to toss it over there? Oh. And who's next? Because I'll be ready for the next one. Yeah, go ahead.
So there's still a classroom.
Sorry?
There's still a classroom.
There's still a classroom. It has walls. It's a room. You're inside that room.
All the kids in the classroom are all about the same age.
The kids are grouped. They're batched, almost, you could say, in roughly the same age in the room. How about one or two more? Thank you. That's all right. Any last observations? Okay.
The classrooms don't have a lot of windows. There's a lot of walls. They're very closed in terms of how.
Yeah. There's almost like a separation between learning and the real world, or learning and the outside world. I appreciate that. Good. Okay, let's do two more. These two over here. One. Thanks.
The kids would appear to be engaged in the same task at the same time.
Yes. So unlike where you might see, maybe an office here where people are working on their own thing or doing their own thing, everyone's kind of being asked to do the same thing at the same time.
I see diversity. There's not much diversity. Ethnic diversity in the classroom.
Yes, there's kind of sameness, or you might even say separation or segregation in terms of the populations in the room as well. Some groups get 100, 200 features that you could imagine, but it's really striking when you think about the differences in all these other sectors, just the number of features that really are unchanged. One of the things that we often talk about are that systems achieve what they're designed to achieve. And so you could look at this as a system that's been designed to achieve something. And you might even say it is achieving what it's been designed to achieve as well. And so the next question I want to just open up for conversation is, if we were to almost reverse engineer, what is this system designed to achieve? Based on, if you were to try to design a system to achieve a set of outcomes, and that system had all the features that you just named in it, in terms of kids that maybe look roughly the same age, facing a teacher, inside a room that's separated from the outside world, all those those are design features you could almost imagine. What's the outcome? So what outcome do you think that this type of system is designed to achieve, whether for kids or for society?
Conformity?
Conformity, okay. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it appears to be like a very uniform environment, like they're all doing the same thing. Like it seems like it's a very narrow scope, like there's not much room for differentiation as an individual person in these environments.
Yeah, so it's almost like it's designed to like socialize people to be a certain way and to act a certain way and to maybe even conform to authority or follow directions or different things like that, yeah.
This actually piggybacks on what he just said, but it's almost like an assembly line. It's like, it's, training people to, you would assume, to do the exact same thing when they get out of this environment.
Yes, and so it's helping almost masses of people be ready to do kind of standardized types of jobs. And the other thing that I think is relevant about the assembly line point is that it's also a very efficient way to get lots of people in. And so this model came about at a time when we needed to take lots and lots of kids who might have been in rural communities or not in school. And it's been a very, very efficient model to give lots and lots of people access to education. Ready? Okay.
It's also kind of designed to build competition internally because everyone's learning the same things, everyone's doing the same things. So you want to see who's different, but not really different, just more competitive in the same aspect.
Yeah, so it's designed almost to create like an individualistic orientation in people, like how do I get ahead, as contrasted with maybe a more collaborative teamwork kind of orientation. Yes?
It teaches the students to, or it trains the students to receive information rather than like generate it or question it. It's sort of monodirectional.
Yes, it's basically training and conditioning people to be passive recipients, take it in from somebody else who has the answer, as opposed to generating the answer yourself. Yeah.
Also, I think, I don't know the right way to word this, but to maintain the status quo, like it's easy for educators and for school districts, like the system's already in place, so it's easy just to keep doing what they've been doing for a long time.
Yes, and you could think about that on many levels, maintaining the status quo in terms of how schools function, how societies function, how power is distributed in society, a whole range of different aspects of the status quo that can get preserved when you take a bunch of people and say, conform, listen, there's an authority figure, all of that, absolutely. Good, so I want to ask you, if you think about all these different outcomes that you just identified that school is preparing people for, and you would contrast that with what it takes to be successful at Google, just as an example. What are your observations? What are your reflections about similarities or differences between what our kind of mainstream model of school is setting people up to do and what it takes to be successful in an environment like here? Ready?
Say it contrasts in the way that here we reward strategic thinking outside of the box, going against the status quo, thinking outside of, developing cutting edge ideas. Whereas this is not that, right? This is conforming to a single form of teaching and receiving.
Yeah, so if the whole point is that we actually need to think beyond today, think beyond the box, and yet we're teaching kids inside a box to follow authority and listen to a teacher and take things in and not create, there's a really important gap or contrast there. Thanks for starting that. Other reflections or observations, ready?
Here at Google, you kind of have to explore your own solutions a lot more and figure them out. And then if you need help, you ask the authority on how to guide you. Whereas sort of in the classroom environment, it's more like, hey, I don't know the answer, and then someone tells you what the answer is.
There's someone who has the answer, and their job is to give it to you, and your job is to take it from them and do something with it, as opposed to you got to figure out how to navigate your own path and find your own answer. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I disagree a little bit with other answers.
Can you just talk into here? Sorry, go ahead.
I disagree a little bit with
Say
other
more.
answers.
Yeah.
I think especially at junior levels, actually even at senior levels, you're given an assignment and you have to complete it. And school is very good at making people receive an assignment and complete it.
Yep, so there are ways in which this actually does set you up to be able to take direction, follow direction, do it. Good. Any reactions to that or other comments or observations?
I think a core difference in the kinds of assignments we would get here is that we have many unknown unknowns in which there might be no one to go get the answer from. Like you would need to dig in and actually find the answer to an abstract problem, and that doesn't really fit into the kind of model that you would normally get in a classroom assignment in a traditional school.
So while it may be true that school sets you up to do assignments, what's the nature of the assignment that's required here? I think that's important. Yes? Did you also have
I would also say even when people are given assignments at Google, it's understood that you might possibly go back and say, like, we need to change the parameters of this assignment. Like, it's not necessarily set in stone, or you might find something to be impossible. Whereas, like, in a school, you can't just, like, if you get math homework, you can't declare your math homework to be impossible or think you need to do different math homework.
Right, so you actually might almost be expected to question the assignment or to change the parameters of the assignment, et cetera, which is often not the case at school. You're sort of evaluated and graded on, did I do the assignment as given within those parameters? Great.
So I want to take a maybe less cynical approach and think that maybe this system, if you contextualize it with the scarcity of information that's available around you at that time, is actually a really efficient system to get people to integrate well with society with a baseline of knowledge that's difficult. Like now with, you know, the internet and access to libraries and resources, you can say that, okay, yeah, we need better sources of information, we need, like, you know, more different styles of learning, but I think this is probably the best that we could do.
At the time, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, did you want to react to that?
And even in most places now, it's probably still the best we can do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if I can kind of rephrase what you're saying, tell me if you think this is accurate. Basically, you're saying this is a system that is really well designed for people who don't have a really large amount of knowledge compared to the people they're interacting with, like their teachers, compared to like Google, where you expect that like everyone has a really high baseline of knowledge.
And that baseline of knowledge is garnered from someplace.
And that baseline of knowledge is garnered from someplace, yeah. And I think particularly at the time when this model came about, to your point, when information was scarce, when it wasn't democratically distributed, when we couldn't take out our phones and look up many, many different things, it was really efficient to have somebody who has the information to pass it on. And also to your point, you know, that's true in certain places at certain moments as well. But it's also true that the information is far more available now and knowledge is far more available than it ever was before. And I think that's a good segue. I mean, like our core observation is that we've got a delivery model of schooling that was perfectly designed for a time that's now past. And so the question is, what are the kinds of shifts and changes that we would need to make in our education delivery model, in schooling, so to speak, to actually make it more relevant to be able to foster in kids the kinds of habits and competencies and things like that that you all described were necessary to thrive at a place like Google, and also maybe more broadly to even change the world in ways that we don't even know yet right now. So within our own organization, Transcend, we think about a set of what we call leaps that we think that schools need to make. I won't go through them all, but they include things like what's school going after? Like in a world where knowledge was scarce, learning a lot of things and learning a knowledge was important. In a world where we can now access lots of knowledge, we need to learn how to create. We need to learn how to question assignments. We need to learn how to change parameters, et cetera. So even, you know, this first leap is literally even the objectives of what's going on. You know, the third one on the list is around what's the role of the student. Is the student a passive recipient, or is the student someone who's actually going to take charge of their own learning, so someone who's going to actually chart their own path, et cetera? Several of you noticed that in the pictures, there was kind of one teacher to many students, and often that teacher has to wear many, many different hats. They have to instruct, they have to tend to social needs, they have to meet kids who might be behind, they have to challenge kids who are ahead, et cetera. Why does it have to be that way? We actually could differentiate roles of adults who could play many different roles, some of which are teachers, some of which may be people who, you know, technically work outside the school. We didn't talk a lot about parents, but one of the things that we didn't see in any of the pictures was family members or parents or caregivers. And the traditional design of school often keeps parents and family members at a distance and sort of says, like, you know, the teacher's here to do the work, you guys can do whatever you want to do, et cetera. So there's a number of different leaps that we hypothesize need to happen for schools to be producing kids that are going to be more ready for where the world is today and what the future demands. I think it's probably more helpful and more compelling for me to show you what some of those things look like in action as opposed to try to describe them. So I want to show you just a couple of short videos that actually put this in the words of kids and educators, because I think the way that we're going to make these leaps is going to be kids are going to lead us there, educators are going to lead us there, schools are going to lead us there. So I want to show you a couple of videos, and after each video, I want to ask you to just be thinking about, what do you notice here? What strikes you as potentially different, and what's the significance of that? So maybe be thinking about that question. This first video is from a partner that Transcend started working with several years ago called Achievement First, who runs schools in New York and Connecticut and Rhode Island, and they wanted to rethink they wanted to rethink their school model to basically produce the kinds of outcomes that you all were talking about so that their kids could really be the best prepared kids in the world. And one dimension of the school model has to do with how do we put kids at the center of pursuing their own dreams and goals? So whereas a traditional design of school is almost irrespective of what a kid's unique dreams and goals is, like it's like, what's the teacher doing? What do we have to study, et cetera? In this design project, we said, what if we flip that? What if the kid was at the center and then everything else was trying to say, how do we help that kid's dreams come true? So you won't see the total model, but you'll hear a little bit about this, and then I'm interested in your observations.
When we really think about scholars as a whole and like their strengths and the things that they love and the people that they love, bringing us all to the table is just so powerful. It says that like we care about you here at school, we care about you beyond school, and I think that that sends the message with Dream Teams.
But today we're going to be discussing my strengths. I think empathy means like having love for others, caring for others, helping others out when they need it. Sometimes I'm around my grandma and I see how she, even if like she believes in God, I do too, but she's like really believes in God, and like she's always helping others, like either if it's at least giving someone some money, like you do that too, Daddy, like you give me some money to give to the homeless.
The concept of the Dream Teams is trying to have more student agency, to have them be the drivers of what's important to them in life. Because what we've learned over the years is that at some point, the school falls away. Even many of the adults become at least less present in a daily way in a kid's life. They go off to college, they go off into the world, and they've got to have a sense of self that's going to carry them forward.
Hello, and welcome to my Dream Team meeting. This is a place where I share my goals, and I tell you my dreams and the strengths that make me to be me. I'm grateful that you guys came here to spend your time to hear my dreams.
The experiences that I've noticed with the children, they all bring a little something into, a little piece of themselves into it, and they run the meetings themselves. So it's nice to see my children actually speaking out and just adding their own personalities to their own meetings.
The purpose of Dream Teams are to be more student-led and student-centered. So scholars get an opportunity where they get to shine in the meeting to practice their public speaking abilities and to actually own their progress.
It's really hard to pass like 5 a week because you have to be at the top of one of the sticks 5. So there's bars that you have to finish. And there's like 6, there's sometimes 7 in a bar.
I see improvement from the last Dream Team meeting.
Definitely.
Especially in the speaking loud, no? I think it's awesome.
We've also been seeing that in class as well, just improved speaking out loud.
When my goal was to get to mission 5 last goal on the Dream Team meeting, and I finished it.
A Noah knows what her goals are, academic goals or passion goals, and Anoa's driving towards those on her own. So she's the one that's saying, oh, I need computer time, or I want a computer so I can do my math at home.
Can you tell us a little bit about why you're choosing curiosity?
Because I want to be focused in STEM and ask lots of questions. And then I could probably be an educational engineer.
I think when we started opening up just with simple questioning, ways to get families more engaged in the conversation, the investment grew and family partnerships grew as a result of that.
All my Dream Team parents have my number. I get text messages with screenshots. Hey, if this homework they're supposed to be working on, and I think we kind of get rid of that barrier where they don't feel comfortable talking to me. So I think the purpose is really to make everyone on the same team. They give you feedback.
They gave me feedback because feedback is a gift.
There we go.
Yes,
Yes, alone. Yes.
What means a lot to me is that my dad and my sister are here to set goals for me and improve on what I'm doing. What about the places you think we need to set goals?
In reading, you said that you are proficient. I'd like to see you advanced by the end of the year because reading is pretty important. So I want you to try harder with reading.
right there. Can you explain me what that picture represents for you?
Awareness. You see scholars who get up there and really feel confident and have, a clear focus on what their goals are and what their strengths are, and that just, feels really good.
My parent was able to see what I did and like how my strengths.
We are building transferable life skills for scholars here. It is really important that they can be strong scholars and academic geniuses, but it's more important that they develop into really strong little people that will become big people that will impact their communities. And I think that the life habits that we're building in scholars in terms of their personal growth, the empathy they show for themselves, for others, the drive and persistence that they will need to persist to and through college, and to just learn more about who they are as people so that they can be stronger at what they're driving towards in life. And that is super powerful, and I just wish more schools were doing that.
Like you just was talking, you never give up. Keep doing hard work and complete your goals.
Cool. So I want to just ask you all, in addition to how cute the kids are, what did you notice when you contrast that to some of the kind of images of school and concepts that we talked about? You want to start here? Yes.
I wasn't sure how heavy that was. I loved that the kid was sitting in the big chair and everyone was sitting around them and they were the boss. It reminds me of Boss Baby, the book. So I just and I'm like, yep, that's my house right there.
And what can you say what you think the significance of that might be?
Right. Oh, sure. Yeah. So to me, it felt like they were in control and they were presenting, and everybody else was listening to them, and I thought that was just so respectful to the child.
Yeah, it really intends to flip like who's in charge of one's learning here in this situation. Good, thanks, Shito. Anybody else have an observation, something that struck you? Yeah.
Saying earlier, you've gone from one child, many children to one educator. Now you have one child, many people working with them.
Exactly. So one of the other things that dream teams do, a lot of dream teams will have parents or maybe an aunt or an uncle or a grandma or a pastor or a coach. There's a lot of adults in kids' lives who have a lot to offer and who have a lot of love for kids. And the typical design of school kind of leaves that all on the sidelines and says it's the job of the teacher, which, by the way, puts a ton of pressure on teachers and makes teachers' jobs super, super hard. If we could actually flip that and tap into all the love that's around a kid, you could even see, the sister who was saying, I have something to offer to you. I want to challenge you as well. Imagine what becomes possible when you open up all those other resources that are typically sidelined right now.
Observation, it was everything in those interactions was so positive. And if you think about, parent-teacher conferences, or if you get called to the school, you're going to talk about what your kid is doing, oftentimes it is only because something bad is happening, or there needs to be an intervention or remediation. And in this case, it was the opposite of that. And so I just think that was great.
Awesome, thanks. Let's take one more if there's any last comment. Yes.
Yeah, my observation was that it was very goal-oriented. If you ask my 8-year-old, what are your goals? He would have no idea what you're talking about, right?
Right.
And number one, and number two was parent-teacher conferences, like you said. We're talking about the child instead of involving the child in the conversation. But we asked the teachers, should the child come? They're like, no, you guys are fine. We're just going to talk about the child.
As if the child's participation in their own learning isn't maybe the most important thing. Right, exactly. I think it recognizes that kids do have dreams and kids do have goals, and it's possible to tap into them if we reorient the way that school is structured. So I want to just show you one, maybe two other clips of older kids. So this next one is an example from a partner of Transcend called Valor Collegiate, which is based in Nashville, Tennessee, but now has a model that is spreading all over the country. And among the 8 great leaps that I talked about, the first one was around really what is school going after? And so what Valor is saying is, if we were to go beyond academics, if we were trying to help kids actually build skills related to relationships, skills related to knowing themselves, skills related to their identity, which is going to be pretty important given the diversity of the world and workplaces and how often they're going to need to reinvent themselves potentially as the economy changes, what would it take, what would it look like to actually build that in scholars, in kids? And they have tried to integrate academics with a lot of the really interesting youth development and even therapeutic practices that you might see when kids are sharing in circles. And so in this model, kids have a whole curriculum that they self-direct through, where they go through a set of different kinds of exercises. You'll see one here at their own pace, at their own time, but then bring that to share it in a group. And it's actually the group that decides Has the kid done the work, and does the kid get to progress and go forward?
I would title my life Going Through the Struggles, and my mom said that she would name it The Butterfly Reaching the Top of the Mountain, and then my dad said Overcoming the Challenges, and Miss Hodge said The Joy in the Storm. The stories about my family, we're Muslim, and we moved here pretty early. We were all born in Kurdistan, and a lot of people ask us about like how it's like, where is better here or Kurdistan, and they really asked about like the food and how we like make it. Something that really surprised me was what my dad one time told me, that I put my mind to everything, and when I do that, I accomplish my goals. So when I was in my last school, I didn't really share anything about myself because I was like shy that they would like make fun of me. But now I feel really comfortable with my mentor group. And I named my life Going Through the Struggles because there's a situation back in Kurdistan, and I have babies. And it's hard to do this because I'm still a mom. Look at my end. It's really hard to go through this. And I really wouldn't change anything about me because it's my identity, and I want to be who I am. And I wouldn't be who I am without you guys or without my family. So thank you.
Lana, thank you for sharing your life story. I saw a lot of love being sent to Lana as she shared. That was very brave. Are there any resonances, anything that stuck with you in Lana's life story? Pearl?
I understand how difficult it must be because I've never moved from country to country, so I can't relate with you with that. But I have moved around a lot in my life. And we have been insanely poor, and we've also been like moderately rich before. But like we've had so many ups and lows with our family, and I can connect with you with that because I mean I understand how hard it is, like going from place to place, and just how kind of difficult it is to deal with that. And I'm just saying that I understand, and I also appreciate that you have the courage to say that in front of a lot of people. I understand.
Similarly, I'm just interested in thoughts, observations. Imagine that this was a part of school, that this kinds of experiences happened literally every week, with kids sharing, bringing this kind of vulnerability, building these kinds of relationships across lines of difference. What did you notice here, and what might be significant about it? Yes.
Immediate acceptance and love she felt from her peers after sharing her brave story, which I think is counter to what you hear about schools today. Kids are bullies, kids are mean, they are not nice to each other, and you could really see the connection amongst the students.
Yeah, and what do you see as significant about that?
I think it's that teaching them a skill set to be accepting and loving at a very young age, and connection to their personal identity, to not be ashamed of who they are. Yeah.
Absolutely. These are things that are not the typical aim of
like
schools.
they're not never. I mean, literally, the question I wanted to ask you is like, how old are these kids? Because like I, as a 28-year-old woman, don't even feel like that connected to my identity. That it's pretty crazy to see.
I mean,
speak so proudly.
Exactly. It shows what's possible when we ask this of kids and we offer them the opportunity to do this kind of work.
I just wanted to just something that's super just core and super basic, just the way that the room is structured.
Mm-hmm.
And in a traditional classroom, it's all the students are facing one student in the front of the classroom, which can be actually really intimidating. And I just liked how the students were sitting in a circle, because it's not like, oh, I'm not I'm with you. Yes. I'm not against you. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here with you. I'm listening. And I like how when kids are that they're listening thoughtfully. They're listening curiously and responding thoughtfully. And when they do that, I like how they get up and they actually like are physically engaging with the person to relate to them. So I thought that was super interesting as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and such a contrast to some of the images we saw earlier about the traditional design. And I think you make a really important point about space as well. Even just like, what does that say about who matters and why and all of it? Yes.
I like that there was an established way to provide real-time feedback with like their finger
Yes.
waves, and they're like getting that instant validation while they're speaking.
Exactly, the kind of rituals and routines and protocols. And I think that brings up an important point, which is it's not enough just to say, let's put kids in a circle. Let's just see what happens. Like every aspect of it is a design challenge. I mean, all those rituals and different things like that were designed, and someone built those, and someone prototyped those, and someone tested those to the point where they felt like this can actually work. And so I think it illustrates some of what we would refer to as the R&D required to actually build this in schools.
I guess one question I have for you, because the presentation structured as schools don't do this and we should do it. And I've had a little bit of a different experience in our public school system where they do have psychologist that comes in and grabs a group of kids and brings them to a room and has conversations like this. So I guess my question for you, schools changed a lot since I've been there. How do you see public schools? Are they moving into this direction? Are they starting to implement these features, or is it like region by region, or the more progressive regions are doing things like this where there's others that are more behind the times, I guess?
There's definitely variation, and I think I'm glad you raised it. I think that there's all kinds of really promising practices and pilots and innovations that even individual teachers are doing in their classrooms, schools are trying, et cetera. And all of that is really positive. And I think we want to essentially put wind at the back of all of those different kinds of efforts. And yet at the same time, oftentimes they get constrained because they're operating still in the kind of core underlying structure of school. And so one of the things that we work on, I'll talk about this more in a moment, is how do we actually fully release some of those constraints so that more of these kinds of experiences can be possible for kids and for educators. Any last comments on this? Yes, we'll take this as the last comment.
I really like that it has to do with, we focus on academic development, but really this is about development of yourself, which I think is a really great focus. I think in terms of a really diverse country, we often face, we're talking about diversity as we're older and trying to solve those issues, but if you focus on it at a younger age, like as a first generation Asian American, I try to hide that part of me growing up because that's who you are when you're a child, you're trying to fit in. And so if we can embrace who we are and bring it all together at a younger age, can we conquer the issues with diversity in the long term? So I think this is amazing.
Yeah, we see and experience and hear so much right now in our country and in our world about divides and polarization. And if we can actually have schools be a place where kids are actually learning that they can bring them whole selves and cross bridges and respect one another, et cetera, how much better could the world be if we could do that starting from a young age? I really appreciate that point. And also I think to your point, like even if all we were caring about was academic achievement, which we believe is only part of what needs to matter, but even if that was all we were caring about, what we're starting to find is that these kinds of experiences can allow kids to be in school more in what we call their executive state as opposed to their survival state. So if kids are feeling traumatized or kids are feeling not free to be themselves, that gets in the way of learning because that's what they're going to be thinking about as opposed to thinking about what's going on actually in the content. And so both to improve even academic learning and then for all the reasons you just said, these kinds of experiences really matter. If we had more time, I was hoping to show you, but we can send some links afterwards, some older examples as well. So there's actually a really exciting partner that we're working with in Brooklyn called Brooklyn STEAM, which is basically a hub model where kids from lots of other different schools come and spend a good chunk of their junior and senior year learning STEAM-related content, but embedded in the Brooklyn Naval Yard so that they're actually doing the real work of coding, of design, of culinary arts, a range of different things with employers and can graduate not just with a high school degree, but also with a social network, which really matters, and also with real skills that they can use to earn money during college, before college, after college, all those different kinds of things. And so it's a really exciting model that if you're interested, I would even encourage you all to check out. There's a whole bunch of other ones as well. We didn't talk as much about technology here, but a lot of interesting models are really engaging and using technology, not just to help kids access content, but to actually create and communicate with ways to learn far beyond the walls of the school as well. I thought I would take just a couple minutes and share with you about our organization, Transcend. Our mission is to enable communities to imagine, create, and spread these kinds of learning environments, extraordinary learning environments, equitable learning environments. And we do that really by playing two major roles in the field. One is that we're trying to increase the supply of great options. So we just showed you snippets out of 2 models, but we're trying to increase the supply of options of what we call catalytic models. Models that are getting great results, not just academic results, but the other kinds of results that we were just talking about. Sometimes we talk about the triple wow factor. So one wow is kids wow. Like, wow, I cannot wait to come to school. I cannot wait to learn. This is exciting. A second wow is the family's wow. Like, this is so good for my kid. I love my kid. My kid is loved. They are growing. They're challenged. It's rigorous. And the third is educators, because the traditional design of school is not easy for educators as well. So if we can create models that are getting verified results, but also having this triple wow factor, that's one piece of what we call a catalytic model. A second is that it sparks demand. And so all of these examples and many others that we work with, people see them and they say, we want that in our communities as well. And so that's part of creating the kind of the wave of change to accelerate it, to your point. And the third are, can they be codified in ways that make it shareable? So to the point of like even all those little rituals and different things like that, someone had to think them up, someone had to write them down, someone had to try them, et cetera. There's no reason why everyone has to reinvent the wheel on that. How do we codify that so that other people can borrow from that? So one piece of what Transcend does is we work deeply with partners across the country that work with young people to try to create these catalytic models so that there are more options for communities that they can learn from, be inspired by, and borrow from. The second role that we play is that we're supporting a broader range of communities everywhere to build their demand and readiness for this work. So to the point that you raised, there is some of this happening, and that's great, but we actually think there's even more latent demand, like what kids actually want, what the dreams that they actually have, what parents want, et cetera. We've started to realize that we can actually work with communities to build a set of conditions that accelerate their movement in this direction. Things like conviction about what really matters, clarity about what are the kinds of aims beyond just knowledge that they want to be building. Things like a culture of innovation like you all have here in terms of let's try something, let's learn from it, let's keep iterating, et cetera. Things like a coalition, so it's not just one person leading it, but the change can actually sustain because parents are part of it, and employers are part of it, community members are part of it, et cetera. So these are essentially the two kinds of roles that we're trying to play, and these are just some examples of partners that we're working with on both of those fronts. We work with districts, we work with charter schools, we work with independent schools who are doing this incredible innovation work. And the hope is that if we can both grow the demand and the readiness, as well as grow the supply, we can start to build bridges so that when a community says, all right, now we're ready, we can say, oh, here's a model over here. We can help make it faster for them to move in that type of direction, if that makes sense. And we do that by trying to invest in 3 kind of capabilities or assets in our organization. One is a set of design expertise and tools. So we have a bunch of people on our team who work directly with schools and are building a set of tools that they can use to go through design processes to learn this. 2 is that we're building a knowledge hub. So there's a lot to learn about what works, what doesn't work, in what context, et cetera. How do we apply learning science, the science of cognition, neuroscience, et cetera? We don't want to just do this kind of innovation willy-nilly, do brainstorming. Like there's a lot that we can learn. And so we're building a hub of knowledge that people can draw from. And then the third is a network where we actually have schools across the country, funders across the country, talent, researchers, et cetera. We've seen that change moves fastest when networks are involved, and so we're building this network as well. Those are the 3 pieces of what we're trying to do. Any kind of questions or thoughts, reactions, comments?
So I'm interested in when you said it's codified to make it shareable, like you want it to be like so people don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. That
exactly
makes sense. How are you doing that? Like, where do you store your content / curriculum / resources, materials, and whatnot?
Yeah, great question. It's a combination of different media. So some of it is stuff that we write down in documents, lots of Google Docs. Some of it is videos that we use. Some of it is technology platforms that people actually start to interact with things directly using the technology. And some of it is actually codified through the form of learning experiences. So for example, that second video that we showed, there's a set of kind of training and learning experiences that people can come to learn how to facilitate that kind of work. So it's multiple different kinds of media that we use.
Okay, cool.
Great.
Thanks.
Building on that question, are you typically seeing more of a bottoms-up approach in the sense of teachers or educators who are ready to kind of transcend or go to that next level? Or is it a top-down with the administrator, a district superintendent, principal, et cetera, saying, okay, my school I want to do this for my school, and then kind of layering your programs on?
What we actually have found is that it needs to be both. So it doesn't work if it's only top-down, because people, quote at the top, don't have the kind of insights and direct experience and proximity that's needed to do that. So a lot of the experiences that we foster, particularly when we're trying to build demand and readiness for this, directly involve educators, directly involve parents, et cetera. But folks at the top create the conditions to make this possible as well. And so typically when we do an engagement with someone, we are also working with the CEO or the superintendent or different things like that to create the cover and create the permission for people to innovate.
So I was curious, in the research that you've done and implementation, have you found that you need to have a radical approach to like gutting out the current system and trying to replace it with the goals that you had listed? Or do you think there's a way to do it like incrementally that just builds upon the current system but moves it slowly towards the goals that you've listed?
So when we first started, we had a kind of a purist ideological approach. It was like you had to take out a blank sheet of paper, you had to leave it all behind, you had to design fresh, et cetera. And we do still believe that you really do need to think about the total environment. It's like if you were taking a horse and buggy and you're trying to say, like, how do we put an engine on that? Like, it's just not going to work. You need to think holistically. But over time, as we've worked with schools and seen these different kind of models, what we've come to appreciate is that there's really a lot of power in components of school. So I don't just mean like what we'd call a point solution, just like one curriculum. But if you can take a significant part of a kid's experience or an adult's experience, start with that. That can make real change, and that can then open the door to what's the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And pretty soon, over several years, you can stack together things, and you step back and you say, wow, that's a radically different environment. But it didn't require gutting it all from the start. I appreciate the question.
Kind of following up on that, how do you think about the broader picture of, I like this idea of innovating and changing and making it more individual for kids, but what do you think about the system? Schools are meant to gear towards tests, standardized testing, and getting into college. How do you think how do you explain that, I guess, as you convince schools to incorporate this in, knowing that eventually these kids need to work towards these types of tests?
Yeah, so we can't ignore that. I mean, the stakes for kids are real in terms of what do you get on the SAT, and can you get access to college, and can you get access to jobs and things like that. So nothing that we're trying to do is trying to say, we should ignore that. We should pretend those things don't exist, particularly when the playing field is not level for all kids. Like really kids having opportunities deeply, deeply matters. So part of the way we think about it is that even if we were just trying to optimize within the current system, lots of these kinds of designs can increase motivation, can be more efficient for learning, et cetera, and just kind of optimize within that current system. And then at the same time, there's a number of efforts underway to think about measures of things that go beyond the traditional standardized tests, whether those are social emotional development, critical thinking, other kinds of kind of future of work types of competencies. And so that work really needs to continue. And as that work gets more legitimized and gets more momentum, I think we'll open up lots more pathways for kids too.
So I know you kind of jumping off of her question. You're focusing a lot on the education system, which is really nice, obviously. But I feel like there's problems that exist kind of at the workforce level where people are judged off of pieces of paper with certain scores or what school you went to and stuff like that. Is there a way to kind of hit this problem from both ends? Instead of just saying let's get these educators better and make sure the students are better so that they can get a job, but instead also say hey, let's try to hire people in a way that's not necessarily just standardized either.
It absolutely matters. And I think Google is among the leaders in kind of pushing on that question and saying, let's not just look at traditional transcripts or where'd you go to school or that kind of thing, but what are the skills? But the more that people follow that lead and do that, I think the more that opens up the possibility for the K-12 system of schools to feel even more confident in expanding its range of outcomes that it's going for as well. I'll leave you with this quote: if you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. I think we've talked a lot about why that's not good enough for kids and for society and for workplaces as well. And if there's one message I would want to have you take away, is it's possible to do something different. If we design the system one way, we can design the system another way. It takes R&D, it takes capacity, it takes all the things that you all do in the work that you do, but it's really possible, and that's what we're trying to do. We would love help in all kinds of different kinds of ways, and people to get involved. So there's a website up here and whatever. If you want to get involved, please join us. It's going to take all of us to get this done. Thank you.